Chip Ingram is the pastor of Venture Christian Church in California. He's also teaching pastor and president of Living on the Edge, which is an international teaching and discipleship ministry that provides practical help for everyday believers. Chip, welcome to It's Your Call. I'm glad you're with us.
To be with you all. Thanks so much.
Awesome, Chip. You know, I've got to confess right at the top, being a pastor myself for a number of years, being a husband, being a father, being somebody just out in the general workplace. I mean, anger, you know, we know it exists, we know it's there, but I've got to confess that after reading your book, I really didn't realize how prominent anger is in our society.
Yeah, it really is, isn't it? Because I think we tend to think of it as it's just people who blow up or if you explode, when that's one way to express anger, but most of us express it in a couple of other ways.
Well, you know, I want to ask you this question, Chip. Why the book? Why did you write the book, Overcoming Emotions That Destroy? What was the need that you felt?
Well, you know, the fact of the matter is I really believe in teaching through books of the Bible, and so I was teaching through the book of James, chapter 1, and I got to a very important passage, and I have a psychological background in terms of grad work and undergrad. And it said, you know, let everyone be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger, for the anger of man does not achieve the righteous life that God requires. And when I got there, I just thought, you know something, I think I better do a little extra research. And I just spent a couple extra weeks on this issue of anger so that people could understand that, yeah, some people spew it, but however, you know, some people leak it. It's passive-aggressive, and they make jokes, or they're late on purpose, or they are sarcastic, but they're really angry, and then other people stuff it. Yeah. And 95% of, according to one expert, says 95% of all depression is anger turned inward. Wow. And so, you know, I taught this little 3-part mini-series, and then we aired it on the radio, and it quickly became this #1 series that we ever had for years. And what you realize was so many people deal with anger or don't deal with it very well. So that's kind of how it came about. I was just teaching through the Bible.
Wow. So it was the passage in James that kind of opened up the fact that there is a huge issue that people have.
Yes.
Wow. Well, you know, I honestly, I never actually recognized the fact that you talk in your book and explain it, how that anger is a secondary emotion. And what do you mean by that?
Well, it is like, you know, so often, too, the problem why people who have anger issues, and I'm trying, anger is rarely, if ever, the problem. And the picture I give people is if you were driving in your car and the red light on the dashboard comes on and starts flashing, you would not stop the car, pull over, go to the trunk, get a hammer, and then come in and smash the light on your dashboard and say, boy, I'm glad I took care of that. In other words, the light on the dashboard says something is wrong under the hood. And that's actually the role of anger. It's a neutral emotion, because there's sometimes that we get angry because we ought to. It's righteous anger. Or sometimes it's a secondary emotion that tells you down inside maybe you've been threatened, or maybe your expectations don't meet what you thought, or maybe there's been a blocked goal. But there's probably 3 or 4 major reasons why we get angry, but it's just a symptom. And once you learn that, actually, you can kind of use your anger as a way for God to point out, hey, there's something under the hood that I want to address. And then you get to some root issues and you can really grow.
Wow. Now, you mentioned unmet needs and unmet, in your book also, expectations as right. causes. Can you just elaborate on that for us for a minute?
Well, you know, an example would be unmet expectations. And, you know, a biblical example would be... you know, you have in Kings, we have this man who is told by the people that Elijah can heal you, and so he goes to the prophet, and he assumes that he's going to say some powerful words and call down from heaven, and of course he says, I want you to go wash, you know, in the Jordan River. And the guy storms off, and the text says, and he was enraged, and he said, you know, we got better rivers than that where I come from, and you know, his servant said, well, you know, what the heck, why don't you go ahead and give it a try? Mm-hmm. And the point was, is his expectation was things were going to happen a certain way, and when that expectation wasn't met, then he had a rage or an anger. And that's the same with us, sometimes we unconsciously have expectations that, in marriage, we have a lot of unspoken expectations, and we think that our wife or our husband is going to respond in a certain way, or they ought, or they should, even though we've never told them. And then when they don't, we withdraw and angry, we stuff it, maybe we're passive-aggressive. So that's kind of the unmet expectations, and sometimes it's an unmet need. I mean, the example in the Old Testament of Joseph, his brothers got very angry because his father showed partiality. There was an unmet need. They were not being treated with the same level of care and concern, and so their anger turned against their brother. It was displaced anger, but when we don't have some real genuine needs for security and significance and affirmation that we all have, then we get mad. And so when you can begin to see that, wow, what unmet needs going on here? I'm in a sales meeting and I make a comment and a colleague makes a comment and someone else makes a comment and mine is dismissed and someone else's idea is taken. Why do I feel bummed out and kind of irritated, maybe angry? Well, you know what? The unmet need was I kind of got dissed in that meeting. My value was like, you don't really matter. You're not really important. And when stuff happens like that, you got to say, no, wait a second. Is that really true? And so we have little things like that happen. I mean, someone cuts in front of you in traffic. People get angry when I hit 7 red lights as what? You think they're timed just for you going to work, 10 minutes late. But we get angry about lots of stuff. And so when you can get your finger on why, then you start addressing it.
Well, because it's, just as you're describing there, I mean, my mind is kind of racing through situations, circumstances that I've been in that, even the red light stuff, you get angry because really it's nobody's fault but your own, but there's that anger. And you always think of anger as, as evil, as something that shouldn't be. And yet God has some very interesting things in His Word to say about anger, and actually they're very positive.
They really are. I think of when I was teaching through the book of Ephesians, and you get to verse 26, and it's in a tense that's an imperative. In other words, it's a command. This is wild because I grew up. My dad had a pretty big anger problem, and before he became a Christian, and we all knew stay away, man. He got really mad and would blow up, But so I always thought anger was bad, so don't ever let it out. And the fact of the matter, the Scripture says, be angry. It's a command. And then right after is, yet do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, lest you provide a foothold for the enemy. And we're to be angry. We're actually, there's times where we need to, when there's an injustice, or when there's something that's wrong. In fact, I think I could make a legitimate point that a lot of Christians ought to be a lot more angry.
Wow.
And we ought to be angry about things that are wrong, things that are unjust, things that need to be addressed, things that are unholy, people that are getting hurt, or even angry, when someone treats you terribly, you should feel guilty about being angry. Angry is a protective response. If someone says something terrible about my wife, or someone seeks to physically attack you, if you're not angry, something's wrong. Now, the issue then is how do you respond using that anger and the energy that it gives, but not sin.
Wow.